Today, we have a special episode featuring Jose's recent appearance on the Lifetime at Work podcast with Greg Martin. Together, they explore the unique challenges and opportunities that define the business owner's career. We hope you enjoy.
Jose, welcome to the Lifetime Work podcast.
Well, my pleasure, Greg. Glad to be here.
Can we start just with an intro of yourself? Let us know just the high-level background and we can dive in from there.
Sure. At the million-foot view, right? I'm Jose Palomino, CEO and founder of ValueProp. We work with owners of B2B companies that want to get off a plateau, who feel stuck, and get them growing again. And we do that in a variety of ways. But big picture is I help owners grow their businesses.
How do you have credibility here? How do you know how to do that, first of all?
Wow. Well, I mean, one is certainly a big part of, I think, business growth is always going to be some sort of sales awareness and marketing awareness. I've been a chief marketing officer, also carried business development for large corporations over the years, and then also in the small business context. So at this point, I've worked with dozens and dozens of business owners over the last 18 years. We documented earlier this year just what were the growth numbers cumulatively for all the clients we've worked with over the last 18 years. And it's about $250 million worth of growth that we identified, helped them find, and helped them actually get. So that's kind of, the credibility is just a lot of results over the years, working with a lot of owners, mostly, I'd say 98% in B2B spaces. So industrial categories, professional services, any kind of context where there has to be a sales process at the back end is where we specialize in. If it's direct to consumer, pure e-commerce, not that we couldn't add value there, but frankly, that's not mine. That I love the stuff where, okay, and here's where the humans have to talk to other humans and make stuff happen.
Right.
That's where most B2B owners really are in an owner-led business.
Yeah. Okay. So if we take it back to start of your career, did you begin in this, or what were you initially trying to do when you
started? I had a kind of a bumpy road, right? So my parents emigrated to the U.S. My mother was born in Puerto Rico, so she came to New York in about 45, right at the tail end of World War II.
Right.
My father came from Peru, probably at the end of the Great Depression. He was born in 1905, believe it or not. So my dad was 20 years older than my mom. They met in like 46.
Yes.
And that's the beginning of my journey. So that story, the reason it's relevant is my sisters and I were the first of our cousin generation to finish high school on time, without a GED or going to the Army or something like that. So I didn't have any of those like archetypes in my family that were this is how you go to college or whatever. So I didn't. And I just didn't know any better. I just started working. And I was really fortunate to land in a back office operations position at a company called Payne Weber. It's now, I think, part of UBS, and who knows what that's part of these days. But it was a big brokerage firm in the Wall Street area. I grew up in New York. And a guy named Jerry was my supervisor, and he took me under his wing. I was a temp. He brought me on permanently. Within a year, I was supervisor at the Department of Accountants, just because I had a very strong math ability and a real sense of getting things done, worked really hard. And I was the beginning of my journey, just being exposed to like business, and had never really had that exposure. Went to a decent high school, actually a good high school, but they, most at that time, they prepared you academically. They didn't really prepare you for like a career in business.
Right. That's way down the line, right? Yeah.
Way down the line. Who thought about that? And college was a thought, but not like today where kids, like in many cases, it's the expectation is you're going to go to college. It wasn't necessarily a lock that way. So anyway, that led me to start working on a lot of information, reporting and things like that. I kind of developed an interest in IT, and then I started my first business. Had no business starting a business, didn't know anything about anything, but got a partner together. We started something, and it led me to buy, and I'll tell you what the business is in a little bit, but it led me to buy an original IBM PC. And through that, I had to learn how to program. So I taught myself how to program, learn all about PC when that was a rare bit of knowledge at that point. And that business failed, But from the ashes of that, I started doing computer consulting for small businesses. And so I started just developing that ability, that facility, understanding how things flow, built accounting systems for, totally from scratch, because that's what the company needed. Again, all the stuff that we take for granted now, package software and instant cloud-based this and instant cloud-based that, that just didn't exist back then. And so that was my early career. At some point, I realized I needed exposure to bigger opportunities to learn more. And I ended up working at the American Stock Exchange down in New York City. That's the little cousin or little sister to the New York Stock Exchange, but still big IT. And ironically, I wanted to learn big systems. No one there understood PCs or networking because they had all worked on mainframes and mini computers and so on. And so I got a lot of exposure and education there. And then eventually, and I'll stop my story here, I ended up getting recruited to work for a company. It's now part of Hewlett Packard. It was called Tandem Computers. It was one of the founding fathers of the Silicon Valley in Cupertino. At the time I joined it, it had just hit $2 billion in revenue. It was a Fortune 200 company. And for 5 years, I was trained relentlessly. I learned, I was on the technical side supporting sales. And then I was given a chance to actually carry a territory myself. And I moved into sales in New York with the international banks. And that's why I saw my first $1 million deal. It was that kind of exposure. So that's just, the early part of the career that got me launched into doing stuff, but really needing to kind of figure things out and really bootstrap a lot of my self-education. I'm sure that you might have listeners that can relate to that, and some, of course, which we always hope for our kids, that it'd be more straight line than that, but it isn't always going to be straight line. I had to kind of figure it out the first, kind of 10 years in business.
Yeah. Oh, there's lots of stuff out there in the real world that you need to see. You can't really create a course for it and learn all the background. You really need to just go out and try it and do it and see it in real life so that you can learn it and then maybe teach it to someone else in the future. So, but from your perspective, then, going through all this and seeing the beginnings there, Silicon Valley, and just, I guess, that perspective of people with technology becoming more and more into play, how do you view sort of the world of work today versus then? And then can just be whenever it sort of makes sense, but from the beginnings of your career.
Yeah, so Tandem was in particular always known, it was written up consistently as among the 100 best companies to work for in America. So it was like today people trying to get into Google or Facebook, that was Tandem then. Okay. Smaller by most measures, but still, again, a Fortune 200 company. What I in that environment, certainly the idea of working remotely was alien. Didn't exist yet. The technology wasn't there yet, right? So you went into the office. But what they did a couple of things. One, every office in Tandem worldwide, and I visited quite a number of them over the time I was with the company, was set up in a way that you had your cubicles, but behind every cubicle wall was a whiteboard, and they really encouraged this idea of on-the-fly creativity. There were always rooms with full whiteboards where you could just go in with a colleague and say, let's work on this problem. So there was a sense of creativity was really valued highly. And then Jimmy Trybig, who was again, a real veteran, anyone who really followed the venture world would know the name, who founded the company and was the CEO for pretty much most of his life until it got sold. He established something called Beer Bust. And so Friday evening at 4:00 in every Tandem office worldwide, you had to give up your cubicle, your work, and go to the cafeteria and hang out with your colleagues. And this way, sales was hanging out with engineering, engineers hanging out with installation, et cetera, et cetera. And when things were going great, it was like catered, it was sushi, it was all of that. When things weren't so great, it was like pizza and a six-pack. And the point wasn't for people to get, blasted or anything like that, but it was the idea that you would actually let your hair down and relax. And in fact, the culture, and this was what I learned was the power of culture. The culture was such that if you were at your work desk while this was taking place, that was considered bad form. Like you wouldn't do that. Like the bosses didn't expect you at your desk. They expected you in the cafeteria hanging out. The other thing that's changed greatly, and so that you don't see as much. I mean, people try to duplicate that with the ping pong tables and stuff like that. But this is really, I mean, and by the way, this is a wide swath of ages. It wasn't just youngins coming into this. I mean, in the computer business at that time, there were a lot of veteran salespeople, a lot of veteran managers, because they had come from IBM, from Unisys, from all these other companies, from DEC, to work at Tandem. The other thing I think that changed was an expectation that culture mattered in a real way, even though it was a very forward-looking company trying to win a very competitive space. Culture, it was one of the early proponents of culture as a real thing. But what I saw was that culture wasn't just lip service. It was actually something that mattered deeply to Jimmy and to other people on the leadership team. They meant it and they walked it. So I think that may have changed some. Even though people talk about culture more now than ever before, I haven't seen great examples of it yet where it really is transformative. It's more like a check the box kind of activity. Like, well, yeah, you got to have a culture statement and you got to talk about inclusivity and all this. But
Yeah.
it was different then. It felt very organic. And to this day, people I meet who worked at Tandem, it was like the best job we all individually ever had.
Yeah. Because it was just through and through. That was the ethos of the company. It's interesting now, though, we're at a certain point with the whole still pushing people back to work in office, that it's a bit clunky, that we're bringing people back, we're sort of mandating it. And maybe it's not 5 days a week, but that it's really, that's, maybe there's a free meal that you try to entice people with, or something like that. But there's not, there's the deliberate, hey, we're trying to do this because of that, is it just doesn't feel supernatural right now. I feel, it's just a little bit of, let's get people back to the office and then we'll figure out what our culture is, because everyone's culture just is really transforming. I feel like right now.
And COVID blew a lot of things up, right?
Yeah.
And not all for the bad. Some things became new capabilities. I mean, certainly from a biz dev or sales point of view, the ability to Zoom meet people, Zoom discuss things with people, do a whole deal with people, never having seen them in person, is a new superpower that allows you to leverage your team much more aggressively than ever before. Having said that, there just is something about, I know it sounds trite, but just having that moment, grabbing a cup of coffee, which doesn't look like a productive moment, but you bump into somebody and say, hey, have you dealt with, or have you, oh yeah, I'll send that over to you. That kind of organic feel. But here's the other thing that allowed it to be that way. And again, I've since moved on, and life is, there's other great things that have happened since, but I think it's worth as an anchor thought. One of the big differences is this: you were not 24/7. And so, kind of like you have leaders, management that want people really engaged and really deeply committed to the mission. We were that, but we also knew that over the weekend, unless it was a super, super emergency, people didn't even have cell phones. So you weren't going to call my cell phone. You're going to call my home phone to bring me in for something. So my point is, you could go really intense because you knew there was a time where no one expected you to be on. And now we're expecting people literally, and the drill. I mean, this has been this way for a while. Somebody drops you an email. You then 10 minutes later get a text and then a phone call. Did you get my email? And it's like 7:00 on Friday night. And you're like, dude, it's 7:00 on Friday night. I'm out to dinner with my family. But nobody cares about that anymore because you're always available. So therefore you must be available.
Yeah.
And that's a stressor. And that's, I think, why people push back and say, listen, I want to work from home because at least I have some control over because you're going to call me at home anyway.
Yeah.
So like the trade-off is, let me at least manage some other parts of my complex life with children, childcare, all that stuff a little bit more, a little bit more intentionally on my part. But yet I understand, and I've witnessed the power of collaboration, of being in the same space. So it's a really delicate balancing act.
Yeah, no, I think we're all sort of going through that right now of trying to figure this out. I know I live in Toronto area, and it's very expensive and challenging, and our public transit is terrible. And so through the pandemic, so many people left the city. They bought a house, and in many cases over an hour's commute, an hour and a half, maybe even 2. And they will occasionally, and even some will now tread back into the city, but it's not so bad. You're coming back maybe, one day a week or something like that into the
Right.
city. And if it's a 2-hour commute, fine. But I finally got that. But we're still sort of adjusting to it. And where you thought you had a job that people didn't care anymore about where, if you're working from home or not,
Right.
now all of a sudden do. And it's challenging. And we're in that, we're sort of in that, trying to figure out what is work.
Absolutely.
What part of it is our life. So I'm curious from that perspective, if you've learned yourself, like, what has work meant for you? Why do you now do what you do in terms of, it's more of a consulting capacity, but in helping businesses and companies, and what do you get out of that today?
Yeah, look, I think there's a few thoughts, right? One, certainly it's I've been doing this now as ValueProp for about 18 years. So at this point, we've obviously done something right because we're doing it for a long time, right? So we're really working, doing the work. One thing that I think energizes me is because I relate, I am an entrepreneur first and foremost. I relate to that. I've had the corporate experiences, which I think were an invaluable part of my development. But I love being an entrepreneur. So I relate to that greatly. So I love working with owners because I know what it is to sign the front of the paycheck and what it is to, have your house on the line at times and things like that. Right. So that gives me a sense of mission that it's actually, I'm not, in a way, it's God's work, right? It's kind of like but it's important because it actually involves lives. I have friends that are corporate citizens, lifetime corporate citizens, and I've seen them lose jobs, and 6 months later they land a better job. But when I see friends who've had businesses lose the business, the recovery isn't just I go off unemployment, get another job. It can be tragic. It can be like devastating, real issues, real consequences. So I have a real sense of mission in working with owners. It's not just the work of the technical work of figuring out their strategy, their value proposition, their marketing, their sales. Those things are manifestations of what my 35-year career arc has allowed me to have these tools, kind of like Liam Neeson. I have a certain set of tools, that I can use, for somebody's behalf. But I am very connected to the personal side of it, like what it matters, why it matters, and what's at stake here. And a lot of times these owners don't have a circle, certainly not on their staff, and sometimes not even socially, of people who understand what the pressures they deal with. I remember I had an owner I worked with that at the height of COVID, they were a manufacturer. They needed to bring people in, and they had family members that almost, I got a phone call late at night, but this one owner said, I've just talked to, I think it was a sister-in-law or something, and she almost just about called her a monster for keeping operations. And she said, well, listen, if I don't do this, I'll lose the business. 40 people will lose their jobs in the middle of pandemic. That's not a great kindness. And I said, no, I told this person, I said, you're taking all the precautions, but the stuff you do can't be done remotely. You literally have to have people working machines to make stuff produce. And the stuff they produced was actually an essential service. So they were allowed to operate. I said, I think you have to be as understanding as you can with your staff. Be as flexible as you can with those people. Like if they're bookkeeper, maybe they don't need to be in the office. Those are things you can do.
Right.
But you're not doing you're not doing something wrong by doing that. And they needed to hear that.
Right.
That perspective, because around them they don't have that perspective.
No, I mean, I founded a food business years ago, and we had to navigate, let's say, through the pandemic. Didn't work out. Ultimately had to close after trying a number of things, and a few years actually afterwards. But it was just as a founder, it's different. It's just a different type of job. You really are all into it. And there's an identity part of it that it just, sort of becomes you, because it slowly, I think, takes over and becomes sort of more and more present, I think, of just, who you are and what you're trying to do. And so, I resonate a lot with the things that you're saying around, trying to be a founder and trying to start something. And today, very similarly, like I'm much more of a consultant, and working with businesses. And for me, I really like today a lot of those elements. I can see those elements. I think there's a certain amount of I described it as not really, but it's sort of loneliness, even though you're the there's lots of people around. You've got lots of call it people working for you or around you. They're not really in the same shoes to the
They're
same
not.
degree. It's very challenging to find someone who you can really click with and resonate with, who understands what you're going through. And the pandemic was tough too, because it was new to everyone. Like, it was this
Right.
new thing that no one really knew what the hell was going on or what was going to happen or how to deal with it. And so it's just, what some of these times where you really need help. But now today, I really like the variety. Like, I like the variety of working with different businesses, because like you mentioned, that those tools, you can now sort of think about each instant, because every company is different, especially when you're trying to come up with a plan to improve them, whether it's a sales function or whatever. It's a bit different, right? And it's kind of a interesting skill, rather than being in the same company doing the same thing over a long period of time. And it's just different. But I do think that, in terms of the ability to be able to do that for 18 years and plus and keep it going is really, helpful. And people get bored. People get, you need things. You're trying to change things. You're trying to
Right.
evaluate and advance what you're trying. And I've always, I was always trying to do that as well. Shifting gears a bit too as well. You host a podcast. I wanted to sort of ask you about that and why you do that, and what do you feel you get out of it, and really what does it mean to you? And also, I mean, just give the audience a little bit of a quick, what is it about?
Yeah, sure. So we started about probably 2.5 years ago at this point, a business growth on purpose. So, on all the usual channels of iTunes, Spotify, Google, and so on. And then on our website at valueprop.com, where I keep the video piece of it. So we do it both ways. And of course, most people listen to it, just download and listen to a podcast. So at first it was like, okay, this is kind of interesting. Maybe this is a way to meet potential partners. And it could be that. And sometimes it's worked out that way. But it got bigger as a bigger idea. And it was this. First of all, I don't know everything about everything. Newsflash, I don't know everything about everything, right? So, and I always knew that, but I think it really started becoming clear to me that there was some tremendously talented people out there that really had depth of knowledge in different areas, different things that would be interesting to the people I want to serve. And I can't serve them all, right? And so a podcast allowed me to bring a lot of helpful information, helpful tips, helpful approaches, exposure to talented people, do all of that, to what end? Well, primarily, I always focus my podcast on I am serving the owner of a B2B business, typically between, maybe not scratch startup, but early stage to $20, $30 million company. Now, anybody could benefit because we're talking about strategy, we're talking about business growth, marketing, sales. So those things are kind of evergreen and very applicable in almost any context. But that's my particular focus. So it's encouraged me greatly because I get like a mini masterclass every time I interview somebody. So I'm learning from the person who I'm interviewing. So I'm really channeling questions that I think my audience would be interested in, and also questions I'm interested in learning about. So if I'm talking to an SEO expert, I'm saying, what's going on in SEO right now? Without getting overly technical where it's like over people's heads, but like at a practical level, what really matters, or content marketing or sales process, things like that. So I get a kick out of these conversations. They're a chance for me to reach to literally masters in the world. And we're getting close to episode 300 now. The other thing is I get a chance for probably about 10% of my episode, maybe a little bit more. I get a chance to speak on topics directly to the camera and just go, just riff on something. And I just did a series that's coming out in the next couple of weeks, answering 20 questions that business owners often have about marketing, right?
Yep.
And we actually did it by compiling questions I've been asked over time, looking at my journal. And then I asked the question of ChatGPT, like, what are questions business owners ask? And I compiled a list of 20 questions. And I just went one after the other, in like 4 episodes, just answering the question. And I think the last category is I also get to talk to owners directly on the podcast. So about another 10% of our episodes is we get actually owner operators and tell us about their story. So something I'm actually very proud of the end product. It's a really good podcast that's really interesting, especially to somebody who owns and operates a business. I get a lot out of it in terms of what I learned from it, the people I meet, and the knowledge that I'm putting something out there that's really useful to the people I'm looking to serve.
Yeah, no, I think that mentioned before, so that loneliness or not, that's helpful, right? Where you have a problem, you're trying to figure it out. Maybe you don't even feel like you have enough time to hire someone to solve this problem for you. You just sort of need the, well, have you thought about this? And that's where you might get it out of
Right.
a podcast. I know I found that, super helpful navigating around various podcasts and looking at certain titles. But I do find, and I find this with my podcast as well, sometimes it's hard to get down into it. It's hard to really get into and it's help. I think the more specific and unique that you can be with your podcast and saying, hey, this is very B2B focused. It's going to be it is helpful because you can kind of cut through a lot of the generalities and get to, okay, I'm going to get very specifically down into, this specific type of topic or for this particular audience, which I think is kind of the beauty of podcasts and podcasting
Absolutely.
today, right?
Yeah, and it's fun. It's actually fun, and it breaks up the day. And I mean, it's another Zoom call, but it's a different kind of Zoom call. And
yes.
just like we're having, I love just having conversations with people, and I've just found it to be something I could see doing for a long time.
Do you see through your work common things people are missing, and whether that be from because you have a sales marketing angle, but just from hey, I am running my business, here's what I'm trying to do. Are there, and I know you do some speaking as well, are there things that you're really, hey, the world is missing, they need to understand this, common themes?
Oh, big one. Yeah. And actually really the kind of the foundation of the work we do is, so I told you my story, early stage of my story. Well, just fast forward, and I'm going to tie the two together. This is now, I guess, closing in on 20 years ago, around, 18, 19 years ago. We had moved to the Philadelphia area with an eye towards starting this business. And my wife, and we've been married now over 35 years, right? So thanks to her graciousness, and thanks to the good Lord that I have a good woman in my life, right? So we married this time, and so going back again about halfway through that journey, and she says, Jose, why don't you go back to school, get that degree you didn't get? You've done all these things, why don't you do that? And I said, well, sweetheart, if I need to do 10 years of night school to be able to validate what I do, then we're really in deep doo-doo, because I'm in the middle of it right now, right? Like, I can't wait 10 years for that. So I told that story within about 30 days to a good friend of mine. His name was David, And I said, can Carolina mentioned this, but I can't see doing that right now. I just don't think that. And I was still raising young kids. And he said, Jose, why would you even think of that? And I'm going like, you see, I knew what I was thinking. He says, you shouldn't be going for your bachelor's degree. You got to go for your MBA. And I said, David, what part of I've never gone to college did you not get, that I'm going to go for an advanced degree? And then he said something to me that resonated with me as an entrepreneur. And I use this often because it's such a powerful thought. He asked me one simple question. He says, have you asked? I said, what do you mean? He said, have you asked if they would consider you? I said, well, I didn't even think. And I was like, I had no words. So that week I called Wharton, Kellogg, Drexel, and Villanova. And I said, would you consider a very non-standard candidate for your executive MBA program? All four engaged in conversation with me. Villanova was most excited, and they said, come on down, we want to talk to you. Because at that time, this is like 2006, 2007, that time frame, most MBA students were often sponsored by their corporations. So you had a lot of corporate citizens, especially in executive MBA programs. I would be an entrepreneur, very different for them. So I went through, and I actually did very well and got my MBA at Villanova. And then for the better part of the last 12 years, I've been teaching in the MBA program at Villanova, entrepreneurial marketing. So that's my journey. So I'm a high school graduate with an advanced degree. So there you go.
Skipped a step, but that's fine.
Skipped a step. And it's funny, my kids at the time, they said, does that mean we can skip this step? I said, no, you cannot skip that step. That is not, that's a rare.
Don't plan on that. No.
Don't plan on that. You need to have like a 20-year resume before you even get that shot. And candidly, I don't know if that would ever come again or whatever, but it happened in my life. But I mentioned that to answer your question, because one of the cornerstones of that program was systems thinking. And I'd already developed some ideas around it. I didn't know what to call it. And then I said, oh, systems thinking. We did 5 semesters of systems thinking. It was a wonderful cornerstone to this program. And to answer your question, what is the common theme? Common theme is owners don't see their business as a system.
Yeah.
They see marketing as something I have to fix, or sales as something I have to fix with a salesperson, or let me fire that salesperson and get a new salesperson. Let me send them to Sandler training to get them better skilled up. Or I need to change my marketing agency because I'm never happy, or I need a new SEO firm. That's what they told me at Vistage. So I got to get an SEO firm. They never pause long enough to say, well, is that really the issue? Like, is that the central issue, that your SEO is not that good? Or is it perhaps the fact that you're consistently late on delivery on your production? Maybe that's the bigger issue. Or did you have no sense of customer success, what that really means, to make sure that people are getting full advantage of all the things you could do for them?
Yeah.
You know, or even is working capital your constraint? So you would otherwise do other things, and you really shouldn't do that trade show this year. You should reallocate those funds in a different way. So owners not looking at their business as a system is where we start. And what I personally really dig into, take a look at the whole business. So I've been called in when they say, you know, our website's no good. Can you fix our website? And I have to say, listen, your website may suck or may not, or may be adequate to the task. I have no way of knowing that. We got to look at your whole business, starting from, you know, who your customer really is, how you really differentiate what you do for that customer, before we get into how does the website represent that differentiation. Like, if you don't have a real differentiation, you can make your website, you can spend 50 grand on a beautiful looking website. It's not going to improve what isn't true.
Right.
So that's what we get at. And long-winded way to answer your question there, Greg, but I did want to give some context. So the answer is owners not looking at their business systemically or as a system is, in my mind, the number one issue when a company stalls or stops growing.
So how does it work when because you mentioned 5 courses and learning 5 courses, like, how does that work? Or how do you teach that? How is that is it a series of components, like the different types of systems
that's what I
is?
went through in the MBA program. So no, what we do, we developed a process, and actually I developed it with a mentor prior to me doing the MBA. Remember I said I'd kind of done systems without knowing that's what we called it, right? So we looked at the idea of your business as a pipe. It has 8 major valves on that pipe. And so you could have a marketing valve is wide open. So things should flow, opportunities should flow to revenue easily. But if your targeting's off or your differentiation is closed, it doesn't matter how much money you spend on marketing, you'll just churn because it doesn't stand out. You're not, and so on, right? So you can start thinking about that. So we developed a process called revenue throughput, the idea of throughput through a pipe. And we first start with helping people understand where they stand. It's like upfront snapshot. Where are you?
Yep.
Where's your critical path? Like, what part of what valve is stuck? And how do we focus on that thing first? And you're always working kind of the critical path to get there, as opposed to, hey, we're a marketing agency. You need a new website, so we'll build that for you. And which is what you're going to get from a branding or marketing firm. It could be perfectly fine. It could be, I'm sure it'll be beautiful, but it may not be, and rarely is the issue.
Right.
One of the bigger issues secondarily is salesmanship. Real professional selling is rare in smaller companies. The owner may have been good at it at one time, but they got bigger and now they're running the business. So they're not, and the person they have in sales is somebody they promoted up from maybe operations because they're good with customers, and they have no sales process, no sales awareness of how to actually do sales in any professional way. Or they don't even know that there is such a thing really as professional selling. Yet they're selling a $200,000 machine they manufacture. They should learn. And that's one of the challenges.
So what advice would you have then for young people looking for what to do, whether they think they want to start a new business, whether they're starting it? I don't know if you have overarching advice, or you could take one in each, but hey, you're starting a business, you're relatively new into it. Maybe you can't afford advice and you're just trying to figure out what the business actually is. I mean, do you have sort of advice along the path of
so
starting a business?
somebody very young, let's say somebody like literally starting out in college,
Yeah.
and look, this is what I told. I have 3 kids. 2 have gone through college, and one is early days, second year in school. They're all very different. But what I've always told them, what I believe is true, is that every job, everything you do, even your own business, has a certain percentage of suck that you have to deal with. It just is. Right. So if you own your own business, there's things like, tax returns, compliance letters, agencies you never knew existed sending you a letter that you have to
Yeah.
do this, that, or the other,
Right.
right? So all of that stuff. And then if you have banking relationships and then managing cash flow, payroll, etc. None of that stuff is fun for an owner. If your early days, to delegate that out is tough because it has to be done right. So you have to make sure you stay close to it. So that's the suck part. Educationally, or if those people don't want to own their own business but want to have a good career, you're always going to have a boss or the boss, or you're going to have the coworker from hell. Those things are there. So you have to try as much as you can to think about what do you like doing in the broader sense, rather than saying I like this job defined as I'm doing search ads
Right.
for Google for a ball bearing company. That you may not love, but you may like the creative process of I like taking an idea and turning it into a graphic.
Yeah.
So you start thinking about how can that manifest. So start thinking more broadly about what you like doing. And here's the thing: if you're 20 years old, I mean, I've seen 20-year-olds that have laser focus. They love math. They want to be a mathematician, or they know they're going to be a doctor. No doubt. They knew that from the time they were 10 years old. Fine. For most of us mortals, it's a fuzzier path to figure out what you love, what you
Yeah.
do. But the old adage is, if you find what you love to do, you'll never work a day in your life. And I think it's not 100% true, but it's largely a true statement. I do believe that. So I've always pursued my passion, what I like doing. So I wanted to start a business. I did. I wanted to learn how to do something. I did. I wanted to learn how to sell. I made sure people knew that from day one. Took 3 years to get that opportunity, but they gave me the opportunity.
Right.
So start being very self-aware is the first place you start. Just what do you like? And don't think of it as a job title. Think of it as, what do you like doing? What do you do easily? What would you spend all day doing if you could?
Yeah.
If money was not an object. Now, when you move into what business to do, that's tougher, because then it gets a little bit more specific. So I'd say early days, unless you're really crystal clear, is a great time to explore. Talking to a young man, one of my son's friends, doesn't really know what they want to do, and they're undeclared. I think that's a great thing to do for a year. It gets tougher after that, but just don't pick a major because you think you have to. Because the worst thing in the world is another unhappy CPA or engineer in the world. Because there's a lot of them. I know, I meet them. They'll call themselves recovering CPAs or recovering engineers.
And you're like, now what? I know I've done some of this. I want to do
Right. And
something else.
look,
What do I do now?
we all
Yeah.
got to eat, right? So there is a
Yeah.
pragmatic side. You say, well, listen, I'm not a silver spoon kid. I can't go to 6 colleges in 6 years until I figure out what I want to do. I have to pick something. I get that. And we all got to work, and 90% of us, 95% have got to work and got to make a paycheck. But don't just chase the best paycheck if it's not even remotely aligned with your passion. Because, and I know people who can do that. They compartmentalize and they say, I don't care about my job. I'm good at it. I
Yeah.
do it so I can enjoy my life. But, that's 50, 60 hours a week of your life. You only have 168 hours a week. So that's like a lot out of your awake time to do something that maybe you don't hate it, but you're largely indifferent. And, obviously this assumes you can have some skills and so on. I recognize that people in life, circumstances and so on. Again, my whole family generationally was like, they were happy to get employment, like just like be asked to do something.
Yeah.
My parents did not have existential angst over what they were doing. They just knew they had to provide for their kids. And I thank God that they were focused and committed and responsible that way. We benefited from it. They knew they wanted to prepare a better future for us. and
Yeah.
they did their best to do that. But I think in today, in the North America, in the developed world, if you have the opportunity, think a little bit more broadly, try a few other things. Don't just fall into the immediate thing that seems obvious in front of you, because it's something you haven't tried. And also challenge yourself to try something you don't think you're going to be comfortable doing.
Yeah.
Somebody says, well, we need you to make phone calls. Oh no, I hate working the phones. I hate making calls. Well, you don't know until you try it.
Yeah.
If you hate it, you can quit it.
Yeah.
Do something different, try something, volunteer for things. That may not be a job, but you could volunteer answering phones for a charity or something that you believe in.
Yeah.
Things like that. If you're young, if you're early stage, try different things, because you don't know what's going to really stick, and you can't analytically get to that conclusion easily unless you have a burning passion for something in your heart already from childhood. Like I said, the person who knew they were going to be a doctor. But for most of us, you got to explore, try some things out before you know what you like.
Yeah. No, I think, and that's part of the reason that this podcast, I started this podcast in the first place, was that it's very challenging to know all the jobs out there. And it's not really about the jobs that are out there. It's about sort of how you go about finding yourself and putting yourself on a path so that you can find something. And there are so many people out there who I just feel like they really love their job because they're getting something out of it. Maybe it's not, hey, I'm playing basketball and I love basketball and that's my job. It's, I am doing something, I am getting better at it, I'm learning stuff, I'm being successful, people are paying me money. There's a lot of reward there. There's a lot of accomplishment. There is a lot of just pride that can come from the job and what you do. And finding that and being happy about it is tough. And it's not always easy, but if you start something, you got, again, like I'm giving a similar advice to a lot of people these days. You got to just start somewhere and sort of start to understand what work is and how to enjoy it. And again, like you said, there are a lot of bad parts of it that maybe you won't love, but there are also a lot of real just opportunities you can get to do cool things and get paid for it, which is cool. And I'm curious to, you call your business value prop, but I would sort of think of that too. I mean, you're basically building your own personal value proposition.
Sure.
Of, hey, here's what I can do. Here's why people hire me, because they're going to need me, and kind of feeling needed. It's good. Like, it's nice. Like, you want that. I think that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to build something that someone wants to hire, and you are needed as a tool in a business.
Absolutely.
Well, it's been great to have you on the podcast. I wanted to give you a quick chance to just, if people want to follow you, learn more about your business, what's the best way?
Well, learn about the business. It's ValueProp, ValueProp.com, and just go visit there and you can check it out. If somebody listening to this says, well, gee, this sounds like somebody who might be able to help us with our particular situation, you can always get on my calendar. We can have a half-hour conversation, and that's easy. That's josepalomino.com. Take you right to a calendar setting, and we can have a conversation. I'm on LinkedIn, Business Growth on Purpose. My podcast is available, all the necessary, what you would think the appropriate channels would be.
Yeah,
but thanks for asking that question. Yeah, and I'm always happy to connect with people on LinkedIn, and happy to help if I can in any meaningful way, somebody who needs help.
Awesome. Okay. Well, Jose, thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
I appreciate it, Greg. Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Business Growth on Purpose. If you like the show, hit subscribe and leave us a review to help other people find the podcast. And if you're ready to take the next step in driving intentional growth for your business, come check out what we're doing at ValueProp.com. We've developed industry-leading programs and systems to help B2B owners take control of their growth. Until then, thanks for listening to another episode of Business Growth on Purpose.